Whenever there's a crisis, and there is one, let's say every either week or 2 weeks, right? Sometimes twice a week.
Feels like every day. I mean, maybe I'm overselling it.
No, you're right. There are crises that happen every day, but crises that cut to the core of sort of like existence. I mean, there are Russia-related crises and rule of law crises, but when there's a terrorist attack in a synagogue, it has these emotional reverberations, and so when that happened over the weekend, it's like my mind was just like in the place it goes when these things happen, and so I have all these comic ideas, and I don't have enough time to do them all, so I'm just trying to get as many out as I can. I mean, I just need to take a little bit of a mental health rest. So last night I was doing another Megan McCain comic. Yeah.
It's a profession and it's your job, and you're not just doing these for yourselves, but it's a way of processing these external things.
Yes, and by the way, when you say it's a job, I mean, this stuff doesn't pay. I just started a Patreon. I'm trying to plug it, but I had a day job for my entire existence in New York, and it ended last year, and I've been sort of like trying to figure out how to survive when these media outlets are, on the one hand, almost non-existent at this point. On the other hand, don't pay enough to sustain oneself. That's why I started the Patreon. Because when you said, when you make your living off of this, and also this article in New York Magazine was like, his career's going great. And it depends how you define career, I mean, maybe my comics have more of an impact now than they had 10 years ago, but I can't live off of them. That's too bad.
I suspect that subject matter is a big part of that. I mean, you're already starting with, being like a leftist or progressive ideology, but also just the issue of Israel is so divisive, even like on the left side of the spectrum, that this is the sort of thing that, like, if it's run in a given publication, that write-in campaigns come and,
I know. I take it for granted at this point, but you're right. That is part of it, I'm going to have to start calling myself a martyr for free speech or some shit.
You've definitely been kind of a bit of a pariah lately since the Megan McCain thing happened. They called you anti-Semitic, which is just bizarre on the face of it.
Yeah, but the thing is, I've been called anti-Semitic by right-wing Jews for a decade now, and right-wing Jews have called the majority of American Jews self-hating for generations now. And so when Megan McCain said it wasn't really surprising to me, because it's just part of the whole process of erasing the majority of American Jews. But everyone else, looking from the outside, oh my God, a clearly Christian woman telling a Jewish cartoonist that he's anti-Semitic is preposterous. But to me, it's just like our entire reality is preposterous. So what she said was not out of the ordinary.
It didn't feel any different from the normal pushback?
Well, it did feel different once the repercussions.
On the scale.
The scale felt different. But I did not notice the preposterousness, the absurdity of her calling it anti-Semitic at first, because I was just so used to it. There were all these or at least, one or two right-wing Jews who have, consistently denigrated me, who were inviting her over for Shabbat dinner and saying, we love you, Megan, and Ben Shapiro types. They're all enveloping her. It's a good sign that, I know she's not evangelical, but, the Christian Zionists are more Jewish to these people than I am, and then the entire Jewish left is, and that says a lot about them.
It's interesting you used the word martyr before, and I think you use it ironically, but it's funny that you use the word, because they are, Megan McCain is looking for any opportunity to martyr herself.
Yeah.
She's throwing herself on the funeral pyre for this one.
Yeah. And also for this new comic, I needed some footage of I just for image resource, I was looking at YouTube videos of The View, and just watching her. There was one video of just her and Joy Behar. I don't know how to pronounce Behar.
Behar.
Behar. Just greatest hits of them fighting, and just watching the way Megan would talk to her or talk to anyone. Such entitlement, such privilege, and such disdain for people who have so much more experience in the media, in the conversation. Because at one point I was like, I don't want to be bullying and all that, but she's really a pernicious force.
You said both self-hating and anti-Semitic, and I think those are two distinctly different things. The self-hating piece is just such an important part of American Jewish identity, of comedy, Larry David, Woody Allen, all these people. That's a big part of it. I don't know that they're necessarily self-hating and being an anti-Semitic Jewish person are necessarily one and the same.
Right. No, for sure. It's a very complicated and nuanced issue in terms of self-hatred in the American Jewish experience, and there are so many different facets of it. Self-hatred has been weaponized by the Jewish right when it comes to Zionism, and it's because they realized early on that if they define Jewish authenticity in Zionist terms, then they could negate the majority of Jews, or those Jews who do not find their spiritual or cultural religious aspiration culminating in Israel. And so they can say, if you're not part of the Zionist enterprise, then you hate yourself because Judaism equals Zionism. That's the way they frame the debate.
But you feel like they've been conflated to some degree?
Yes, they have. I mean, well, it's been anti-Semitism has been weaponized, and so has the concept of self-hatred. So I like to flip the script and say, if you're battling against the majority values of post-Enlightenment Jewish community worldwide, then you're the one who's self-hating. But I'm not trying to say that too much, but I mean, at this point, they're allied with Nazis, though, so the game is up.
This hasn't been your main source, or really, I guess, much of a source of income for you. You know, you've been doing this this day job up until recently. What's been driving you to do the comics?
Originally, when it was like comics, narratives about Jewish issues, identity, and Zionism as well, but not exclusively that. It was my way of exploring and processing these aspects of my experience and identity. You know, I wrote a Jewish travel book to Central Europe prior to even starting drawing comics as an adult. So it's, you know, it's all part of that. And then once the Trump era began, then it became sort of like a mission obsession kind of thing. Not so much processing, but sort of bearing witness to the horrors that are happening.
Was there a marked change in your output from Trump being inaugurated?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. For a couple of reasons, my comics are different now because prior to the election, most of my comics, and the ones like in Diaspora Boy, are these long narratives. They're full page. They used to be in the forward. A lot of them did full page broadsheets, multi-panel, like 12 to 15, exploring an issue through various nuances of a narrative, allegory or analogy, etc. But now, partly because the news cycle is so quick, I don't really have time. You know, like as we were saying a moment ago, things change so quickly. You can't remember something that happened like 2 weeks ago and it was an atrocity then. I mean, that's one of the reasons. But also, I feel that the older comics I was doing, I love them, but they had sort of like a leisure or a comfort of not being pressed by the panic and the terror of what we're experiencing now, you know?
In terms of being tied to a current event, or just in terms of everything being an ongoing horror show?
Yeah, the latter.
Okay.
The latter. I mean, also that, but it's mostly the latter. And so it's hard to like sort of like take a breather and just sort of like see the big picture and do a larger comic. And the couple that I've tried, like, that I have done, I mean, one of them I just don't really like. It's sort of like this, you know, broad humor, involving Trump and a horse head.
The Godfather reference?
Yeah, it was a Godfather reference, and also Midsummer Night's Dream. Bottom.
Donkey, yeah.
Yeah. So, but overall, I mean, the comic just felt like it doesn't really fit for me. It didn't really feel like a natural expression in the current moment, whereas if I had done it prior to Trump, you know, not using Trump, but, you know, other personalities, it would have felt more natural, I think.
You said something interesting on Chapo that I wanted to press you about a little bit. I think, you know, you mentioned it, and, you know, it's a very fast-paced conversation. It just sort of passed. It strikes me. I sat in on one of their recordings one time. It just strikes me as something where, like, you have to, like, find your... The
other thing is I'm not well-versed in gaming, and so when they go on their riffs...
You're not a regular Fortnite player?
Yeah. So I just get that combined with lack of sleep. I was a little bit...
You're not really telling jokes anymore, or there aren't really... It's not set up in punchlines. Like, certainly they're not gag scripts, but the really obvious humor has left.
Yeah, it's true. You know, I call them snapshots from... or postcards from dystopia, that kind of thing. They're not like literally taking something someone said, but just tweaking it a little bit, and they're not making a joke out of it. And for me, actually, I've really enjoyed, or, you know, enjoy is a, you know, relative term, but I have found a certain amount of sustenance from the actual art process and drawing, you know. And
catharsis?
Maybe it's some kind of catharsis.
It's meditative.
It's meditative, yeah. So it's like there's such horrors going on, and I have it seems like, you know, on paper a very basic idea, just like, you know, one sentence that Trump is saying or that Meghan McCain is saying, but the art itself, the actual creation of it through the art and the process is, I guess catharsis is a good word for it. And I like the art that I've been doing now, the grotesqueries, you know, which mirror what's happening. I'm not going to say more than the older narratives I used to do, but in ways that I'm just, you know, it's clicking for me now, so I'm enjoying it.
Do you find that it impacts the way you watch the news, the way you process these things? You know, I've talked to a lot of cartoonists who do strips, like particularly people who do autobiographical strips who start to view the world through 3 panels.
Wow, that's interesting. Sure. I can imagine if I were doing that kind of thing, especially with a static number of panels each time, I would be looking for an arc everywhere I go. Like, I need an arc. It can't just be like an experience with a person at the deli. I mean, it can't just be an exchange. It has to have an arc to it.
Yeah.
And so you're actually monitoring your own sort of your thoughts, your reaction to things happening.
There's more of a narrative than, as you said, a snapshot.
Exactly. So, I mean, to apply that to what I'm doing, no, it doesn't like change the way I live in terms of looking for it. In fact, when I try to look for something, it usually doesn't come. It's usually basically I just get apoplectic and speechless about something that's happening that I sort of like, journal sort of, on the computer, just like, I just start writing, and my initial ideas are just like horrible, just anger, just pure anger. And they're not, just don't even I know people would say that about my finished product, but you should see the stuff that I reject.
It's just like pure id.
Yeah, maybe that's it. It's pure id. And then I just start writing more about why I'm angry and it's like maybe therapeutic to just write it out, even though it's when I look at it again, it's like, wow, harsh. But then finally, I come up with something sort of like without even realizing it. I'm like, hey, wait, like this thing, like 3 sentences back, that's actually a comic right there. And it's like, wow. And then I'm like, okay, then I get into like how to actually draw it.
It starts longer form and it sounds like being an editor is a big part of putting these things together.
Yeah, and I should say that's the way I've been doing it under like these snapshots from dystopia. Back when I was doing the longer narratives, it was different. It was like playing with a theme. It's like, oh, this is the theme, of like Israelis preferring evangelicals to American Jews, like, and then I'd like go into like an analogy and then like explore it from different sides. So it was like it was generally calmer. Whereas right now it's like I'm like we're off the cliff, something horrible just happened, and I'm just like scribbling notes as I'm falling down, and then hope by the time I hit bottom, there's an idea there.
The Meghan McCain is a good example of this from the standpoint of it's a snapshot. It's the shot of her. There's dialogue, but there's a lot going on. And in order for, I suspect that in order for this to kind of have the desired impact, it almost has to be like blunt force trauma to the viewer, to the reader.
I mean, to me, that wasn't like bludgeon. That was more just like little Easter eggs throwing in all around. And just like visually represent her exploitation of Jewish kitsch and trauma. So I wanted, at first I had her actually dressed up. This is probably like the earlier drafts, dressed up in a, Auschwitz prisoner uniform. And I'm like, no, you know what? No, you're not going to do that. But I did want a certain symbol of her clutching Jewish trauma.
Break that down for me. Like, why are you like, this first impulse is a bad impulse? Obviously, it does seem like there's a line that's being crossed there, but there's also a line, it's more subtle, but they're both implying or getting at the same thing.
Yeah, but I mean, in that case, I think the subtlety was, warranted or necessary, I think if she was in a full Auschwitz garb, I would have, I'm not one to talk because I generally do lose the reader whatever I do.
I'm just wondering, like, how much different things would have been for you, like, had that happened, because, like, your life was, like, upturned a little bit after this.
Yeah. I mean, I have no idea, but I will say that I needed some kind of symbol of Jewish trauma because she was crying on TV, appropriating Jewish trauma and playing a victim because of her familiarity with Joseph and Hadassah Lieberman, and so that was exploitation of Jewish collective trauma that she should not be allowed to get away with that.
Do you feel the need to retreat a little bit, or are you being kind of emboldened by this pushback? I suspect not, having seen this new Ilhan Omar one.
The reason I won't is because I'll be honest with you. I mean, I don't know if we were recording then, but when I said that there aren't really many outlets at all, there's just like a couple. I've enjoyed just posting these to Twitter, even though it's, working for free, because it gives me total freedom. And I love that. I love the fact that eventually I'm going to run out of the savings that I accrued during my day job, but that's going to be a problem. But we'll see, to revisit it then. But right now, it's like, not only am I not going to allow bad faith assholes to censor me, but I'm not even submitting towards an editorial process at this point, And also, I mean, with certain, caveats, I used to send out my scripts to a series of friends, very close friends, who would give me like, line edits pretty much. I was drawing kind of like for my friends. And so the friends that I respected, I was curious, if I was hitting the right notes or if they had feedback or whatnot. Now I'm not even showing it to people with certain exceptions. Sometimes I will, but in general, I've just been going with my gut, and it's been exhilarating creatively to do that.
It's interesting because I think we've mostly discussed the creation process in terms of how it impacts you and your feeling toward it. If the audience is completely different, if there isn't an editorial board, if it's not going through a publication, if you're just sending it through social, is there a kind of impact that you're looking for to get with these snapshots?
Generally, I am hoping that it will energize and galvanize a besieged left that has been gaslit for 2 years now, and that has been forced to both sides our right-wing nightmare, authoritarian nightmare. The goal is these are postcards of dystopia, but they're also a sort of trigger towards sanity, because when we're being bombarded by all these atrocities and being gaslit throughout, we can start to question whether we're rational after all, or you can also make you want to give up. And then when you see an image that is so devastating in its depiction of what is actually happening, it's like, wow, no, we got to keep going because this is really a fucking nightmare.
Was part of the move away from humor the difficulty of heightening absurdity in the current state?
Yeah, it might have been that. That's one way of saying it. And that's I'm trying to think, because there's different aspects of it. And one of the aspects, as I said, is the quickened news pace.
Comedy in the age of Trump, that not that SNL was ever cutting edge political satire, but that it's Cheeto in chief. That's kind of where we're at right now.
Hamburgers or whatever that is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Actually, when I talk about that comic that I'm not as crazy about now, the bottom, the horse comic, it's essentially that. It's sort of, and in fact, I was using headlines. I was using it was a week after Kofevi thing.
Yeah.
I used that as the nuclear codes Kofevi was in the codes. I mean, that's shtick that they would do on SNL actually.
It's pretty standard political cartooning.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Maybe that's why it just bugs me whenever I look at it today. And there was something else I put in there too that was headline ripped. I think that's a good point. I mean, maybe it's just that there was such self-caricature that when you're looking for humor in it, it's it's obvious. We know this already when we look at the news. So yeah, I guess that is a large part of it. Although also the news cycle thing too.
Can you walk me through the process of making a comic sort of beyond that initial brainstorming phase? Because you mentioned that when you did that interview and when you're doing this interview that you're running on very little sleep because you had been working on a comic. This is the complaint with cartoonists across the board of the amount of time it takes to make something versus the amount of time it takes to consume it. But that's doubly so with a panel like this because, you're working on a single image, but it took you all night, it sounds like. Yeah, and also I wish I had done it a full day ago, and I also wish I had posted it this morning. But I just at a certain point, it was 7:30 in the morning, and I'm I could stay up another 2 hours and finish this and then post it at 9:30, but I'm I just need to have at least 2 hours of sleep. And also, as it turned out, I woke up at maybe 9:30, 9:45, and then I was working maybe 3 hours on it because I added a couple of extra figures in, etc. You have trouble hitting send.
Yeah, even after I what? Honestly, I mean, it's I don't know if you want to go into this, but yeah. I am sensitive to the fat shaming issue with Meghan McCain and body shaming, etc. On the other hand, I am depicting her as this physically overbearing presence in this particular comic. She's reaching over the entire view table to talk to Adolf Hitler.
I think that's a good point, and it's something I was thinking about today with the William Barr thing happening because there's been. Some people call him a fat fuck online, which is just there's 8 million other things. I think it's a little bit different. I think to some degree, body shaming with Trump is okay because of his own rhetoric.
And vanity, I mean?
Yeah. Okay. And the things that he said about other people.
Oh, good, yeah.
The thing he said about Rosie O'Donnell, the thing he says basically about women, turning somebody's words back on them is fine, but using somebody's weight or, and this tends to be kind of a problem with political cartooning in general, right? Is they heighten certain physical aspects. These people are garbage people. Not because of how they look, but because of their horrible black souls.
Yeah. Anyway, so with this, in order to make room for Whoopi Goldberg in the back, the thing is, I've been doing things on a Wacom Cintiq. So you can erase and go back and... Not just that, but the gift and the curse of the Wacom, or doing anything on the computer, is you can change the size of everything and you can keep increasing the canvas size until your computer won't work. I wanted a little more canvas space on the right to have Whoopi there. But when I did that, I added canvas and I'd already cropped Megan was just going off frame. When I added even just I don't know, a centimeter of extra room on the right, this is at noon today. And I just quickly, drew added her body. And then I realized after I posted, because you asked do you ever, have regrets or whatever? This is a good example of regret. I inadvertently, when I just quickly stretched her out, I should have made her made the body go down more. With this one, what I liked was I made her like a worm, like a snake. She's just this earthworm coming out as a body. And I thought that's actually better than, fat shaming kind of thing. Cause it's just a worm. So it's it's not about the weight or the large frame. Yeah. It's just about, the slipperiness of her. Anyway, instead of giving her sort of a joint or a hip where it's going down, I have it continuing. So she looks even more corpulent than I had intended. And it was just because I was quickly throwing ink onto the canvas, so to speak, at noon.
It's maybe hard to have a dialogue with a cartoon. You have this thing that you put out in the world, then it sort of takes on a life of its own. I mean, ideally, it would not just be a way of letting people know that they're, not alone in the world, but also a way of of spurring on a conversation. But I mean, do you feel like you have that ability that you're able to sort of continue on that conversation once it's out in the world, or is it just have a life of its own?
Well, it depends. I mean, it's a case by case issue. But I mean, with my comics, when the right comes after me, especially on issues of Judaism and authenticity and erasure, then I don't like I don't like their malicious interpretations. On the other hand, though, I try not to find Daily Wire shitheads who are trashing me. I often only see it because people will tag me or whatnot. Although I do search the comics tweet itself to see if people, what the reactions are, and that's how sometimes I will find the malicious assholes saying, "Oh, another anti-Semite, Der Stürmer art from Ellie," and that kind of shit.
Is the idea though to sort of let it stand on its own?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
For example, the regrets that you have with the way this accident of digital editing that made Meghan McCain look different. When something like that happens, do you feel the need to address that, to sort of let people know that it wasn't your intention?
I do feel the need to, but I also recognize that you can't do that. I mean, you can't have a postscript to a comic and say,
exactly.
by the way, or I actually sometimes envision, because I'm just tweeting them, I can just, it's not like it's in like the New Republic print edition or something. So I can just send a follow-up tweet. Oh, actually, I prefer this one. And people won't even see the difference because it's all like, my intense, self-critical eye for the art. But just like to place myself, I'm not going to do that. I will complain to a friend or two in DMs about it, but that's a limit of it.
It sort of makes you maybe not sympathetic, but it makes you understand why so much of political cartooning is so unsubtle from the standpoint of like that sort of classic of big fat guy with a top hat and it says like Washington bureaucrats. Why political cartoonists traditionally have felt the need to spell everything out.
Yeah, but it's also because of limited imagination and the inevitable hackery that comes from daily cartooning, I think.
But that, like, for example, that a cartoon about Ilhan Omar or Meghan McCain, that if you don't go out of your way to spell everything out, then people are going to absorb that however they want, and they're going to weaponize it in their own way.
Like this comic I did of Ben Shapiro on a YouTube thing, crying crocodile tears for the victims of the New Zealand shooting in Christchurch. I had him with a graph. He was like, crying. Meanwhile, he had a graph with the X and Y axis, Muslims and terror, going straight up. And this Daily Wire shithead comes at me saying, "You actually got the X and Y reversed. It should be, Muslims on the Y, whatever." And it turned out he wasn't right. I had all these mathematicians were coming in and be like, "This guy's a shithead." There's no expression of causality when you choose which is X and which is Y. This person from the Daily Wire was maliciously misinterpreting or sort of focusing on a very specific aspect of it in a blatant effort to ignore the fact that his boss incites to terrorism. So, I mean, there's no way to control bad faith interpretation.
It's one thing regretting sort of the way you draw somebody or digitally edit somebody, but do you ever feel like you've crossed the line in terms of content that you genuinely regret?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Well, I mean, I don't know if there's an example that will fit what you're looking for, but like when I look at some of the comics in Diaspora Boy from 2009, 2010, 2011, I was clearly, I don't know if I would use the official term liberal Zionist, but I definitely had sort of faith, I think, in a two-state solution early on, and I interpreted the alternative, binational state essentially, or apartheid. But I mean, I thought a binational state, I learned throughout, the Oslo process that, we're fighting, to avoid a binational state because that would be a nightmare. And of course, all binational means, on paper is full suffrage. I see some of the early comics in there were both in some cases talking about the moral underpinnings of the origins of Zionism in ways, it's amazing. I was being called an anti-Semite for back then when I was like, I was just like disillusioned. I wouldn't say Zionist, but, a person who had some respect for it, for, the ideology of aspirations early on.
It's a regret from the standpoint that your ideology has shifted.
Exactly. It's a regret from that perspective. And I don't know if you're looking for something about regrets of like, drawing Holocaust figures or something like that.
That's interesting in and of itself. But yeah, I guess a good follow on to that is, do you feel like you've crossed a line that you shouldn't have?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think offhand of any example like that. If anything, it's like I regret stupid gag or something like that, but I don't regret anything. In fact, you know what? I regret the comics I don't do. I regret the comics, there was one with Scarlett Johansson when she was the spokesperson for SodaStream. I wanted to have her, frankly, my dear, I don't get, that Gone with the Wind, Scarlett. And I forget what she was going to be saying, but I was going to have her as a plantation owner. And I don't remember the whole details now, but I talked to people that are like, no, you cannot touch slavery. And maybe, and you know what? This was like a few years ago. Today, it probably would be even more problematic to do it. But at the time, I didn't do it. And then I talked to the head of 972 magazine, this lefty Israeli magazine. He's like, yeah, we would have run that. I mean, yeah, that's actually a good idea. And they sometimes reject my stuff. So it did make me realize, if you have a good idea and you like it, you should just do it.
That was almost a regret of not doing it because you were worried about going too far. So it's almost like the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you doing this full time, or are you not doing the day job because this was something that you were hoping to pursue full time?
No, the day job ended because I had a certain role there, and
just ran its course.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. I mean, it was for a while, and it was good. It wasn't like 5 days a week either. So it was like it was ideal for the kind of work I do. So no, I did not quit it in order to pursue my dreams. That would have been delusional, unfortunately,
especially in New York.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's so silly to say because I don't know when this podcast is going to come out, but I have been working on a book proposal of a political satire book, which you saw my Chapo illustrations. Mm-hmm. So it would be like, full page illustrations, but a mock children's book with like sort of, a couplet or two couplets on the left side, making fun of the neutered, I should say, resistance.
The Democratic Party sort of Trump resistance.
Yeah, exactly. And the grifters, etc. Yeah. It's been difficult.
What are those twin brothers named?
Yeah. You know what? Actually, Krasenstein's.
They wrote a kid's book.
They did, and I was partly inspired by that. But I do want to say that no one outside of Twitter knows who they are, and so I would avoid targeting them.
Such a fascinating culture. It is fascinating the way people have become celebrities based on replying to Trump. It's crazy, right?
I know. I wonder, do they make money off of like their shtick, their grift? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, they tried to capitalize on it with the children's book, but I think that completely fell flat.
Yeah. The muscular Mueller and everything. But the problem has been that, I'll tell you, one of the problems has been, I don't know where we're going to be in a year. And the idea was this book will, and by the way, I don't want to be disparaging. I mean, I still want to finish this damn proposal. But, it's like, we could end up with Elizabeth or Bernie as the candidate. We could end up with fucking Beto as a candidate. Yeah. And, drawing now, it's like, it's very hard to predict, actually. It's really hard to predict where it's going. Although you can always rest assured that if you're betting against,
best case scenario.
Yes, if you're betting against, forces of social good, then you're going to do okay. Like Pelosi keeps reminding us of that, and Schumer does as well. Anyway, that's why I just had such exhilaration over these quick turnaround, crisis-infused comics. Whereas honestly, I mean, I had a little thing about Mueller. I think everything about Mueller is flipped ever since, He used to be like the savior, as we were saying, like Krasenstein. He was a savior, and now...
It was Mueller time.
Yeah, exactly. And now people are pissed at him. Jim Carrey just had some, one of his, things about Mueller.
It's exactly like Comey, the flip, right? Where Comey was a villain and then the hero of the left.
Yeah, it's true, actually. It's interesting. The impeachment thing, it's like everyone was saying impeach, but then now it's like, well, the people, they don't, it's just like...
Everything was hung on collusion.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
There's 8 million other impeachable offenses, I'm sure, in that report, but everything was hung on collusion.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So these are the kinds of things that are hard to predict, and also it's less than exhilarating to write and draw on that. But anyway, so my idea was if I can get this proposal together and sell it, because digital media and print media do not pay living wages. That's just like... I think it's a sentence that can be true unless you're fucking Matt Taibbi or something, right? So,
and even he's got that, he's basically serializing his books now.
Oh, really? Didn't realize that.
He's doing something where, instead of doing a book for a year, he'll put it up chapter by chapter and you subscribe. Oh, so really? Even he's got his sort of own hustle going.
Wow. Yeah. I didn't realize that.
And he's like... And a top-tier political reporter.
So I'm replacing the delusion of being able to support myself via media, digital or print media, with the delusion of the publishing industry, that kind of thing. But I do think it's a better delusion to have than the print or digital media thing, you know.
You really started drawing comics in earnest as an adult, like over the last several years? I mean, it's a relatively recent occurrence, it sounds like.
Well, I should say, you know, I drew them when I was in college, and I drew them throughout high school.
But
and
as
before
kind of a
that,
hobby.
No, I actually wanted to be a political cartoonist when I graduated college, and it didn't pan out. I ended up moving to Europe.
Your dreams of being a political cartoonist didn't pan out?
I know. Oh man, when I think of my old work though, I just don't like the old stuff I used to do. I mean, with a few minor exceptions, you know. So I moved to Europe, and I ended up writing a travel guide to Jewish Europe, and it was an amazing experience, and I loved it, and I didn't think I'd ever draw again. I was more interested in writing literary, you know, fiction and or non-literary fiction too. And then just like, you know, in 2006, 2007, things started happening where I just realized, I hadn't drawn in 10 years, but I was like, wow, I was very rusty, and, you know, I'd always wanted to use the brush and ink, but I don't think I ever was super at it. And I just started again and just like kept training myself. Yeah. And I finally got to a point where I was happy with my brush and ink style, even though it took me forever, even longer than it takes me now to do stuff.
You have to essentially retrain yourself in order to start doing it on digital.
Yeah, retrain myself, but it came quicker than I expected.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the main things about the brush on Bristol was waiting for my Deleter 2 Deleter 2, the white plaque ink. It's this Japanese, it's probably poison. But I used to love that stuff. But the thing is, like, it would take, 12 minutes or so, between 10 and 15 minutes to dry. And so it's, black indie ink will dry like maybe in a minute or so. So, but waiting when I'm doing corrections or when I'm using white over black, it's just insane. Whereas on the computer, you just push the X button. I'm talking to someone on the phone. They're like, "What's that tapping?" And it's because I'm drawing while I'm talking, and I'm going XXX, black, white, white, black.
This gets back to what I was talking about before, talking about music, the difference between analog and digital. And in the same way that you're creating a constraint for yourself with a single panel to distill a kind of a single idea, to take all these big news stories and do it one phrase, one panel. The one thing that offers you that sort of slow process does is it is a constraint, and it is a way of editing yourself, and it is a way of making sure that you're putting your best idea down and that, you don't have a lot of time to second guess.
Yeah, there are various aspects. And I do want to say, like, digital is a gift and a curse. Yeah. There are negatives and there are positives. But the one thing is that sometimes when I haven't decided completely on the text of a comic, I just have this vision, I can start drawing without worrying about that. Whereas when it's on Bristol board, you're right. You can't, I forget how you phrase it, but,
can't be too precious.
Yeah, because you need to know from the start how much real estate to leave for your words, basically. I mean, that's the main issue of it. And whereas on the computer, you can keep resizing and changing canvas. And I do that. And I enjoy doing that, even though it, sometimes causes the computer to crash.
You clearly enjoy the process of drawing as much as you do any other aspect, it sounds like, of creating the comic. I mean, is there interest in doing something that's a little bit more mainstream or commercial?
When I embarked on this, not having a day job, I was hoping for that. I still haven't, maybe I will. I haven't pursued the, the illustrator route. I mean, I just feel like a lot of people like my work, but I don't have an agent. I don't have an illustration agent. The amount of times I am called by an actual outlet is like maybe once a year, I mean,
and has that changed now that you're a little bit more in the spotlight?
It has not changed at all. Yeah. Nobody. I mean, I feel a little bit emasculated here saying it, but nobody asked me for work.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I've known about your work for a while, and then I was like, oh wow, this is this is interesting. Like, we should have this conversation. You go on Chapo, other people are interviewing you, so there's interest from the standpoint of people wanting to talk to you, but it hasn't translated into commercial.
Zero. It's interesting. It's like that New York Magazine. His career is running high. No, well, depends how you define career. It's definitely not. If you define career in the most simplistic terms of being able to support yourself, no, it's not. So that's discouraging.
If something is politically divisive, especially, Israel's the conversation of Israel breaks up families. Maybe larger mainstream outlets don't want to seem as though they're,
even if they're asking me to illustrate cats and dogs for their pet issue or something.
I suspect that it's probably in terms of who you hire.
Yeah, that's fucked up, and I hate to think that that's true, and there's no paper trail of that, so I can't prove it. But I would really. It's really discouraging and distressing, actually. But no, I wouldn't mind doing an illustrated book that's not political, and I was starting to brainstorm ideas on that. It hasn't really moved forward, mostly because, again, we just keep seeing these crises, and then I just drop everything and start drawing.
Are you at least enjoying the process of making these snapshots?
Yes, I'll tell you. I know Woody Allen, you shouldn't be quoting him at all anymore, but I'm going to say this. I once saw an interview where he said when he's not making a film, he does films so that he doesn't fall into clinical depression. He will be depressed if he doesn't make films. And I was always like, what are you talking about? How can that stop depression, But now I sort of, I kind of see that a bit, because when I'm, and it might be other issues as well, and, not having a day job at the moment. But when I am not inspired by an idea, I really feel down, dejected, and it's like, what the hell am I doing, you know? And then when something happens, an idea comes, I don't want to use the wrong terms because I'm drawing such horrible things. Yeah. But there's an exhilaration there, you know. It's clearly not manic depression or anything like that, but it has just, you know, in terms of not bipolar, but like the you know, like on or off, essentially, you know. When there's an idea that's coming in me and that's like, you know, erupting, so to speak, I'm excited by it. And it's like the opposite of depression, and the vice versa, the opposite is true as well.
It gives you purpose.
Yeah, it gives me purpose, and it's like the creative energy of just like realizing a vision is. I mean, people, you know, these are grotesqueries and all that, but they're also, to me, they're beautiful pieces of art, and so realizing them is you know, great. I don't want to say privilege because that sounds ridiculous, but I really enjoy doing it.
There you go. That was Eli Valley. You can check out his work over on Twitter. It's twitter.com/Eli Valley, or support him over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Eli Valley. Thanks so much to him for taking the time to do that. Thanks to you guys, as always, for listening to the program. If you like the show, there are a number of ways to support us. You can rate and review us on iTunes, Google Podcasts. We're on Spotify and YouTube now. Like us on Facebook. If you have any feedback, it's rolcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Tumblr. That's rolcast.tumblr.com. That's the first and best place to get all of your RIYL related information. And that's about all we got for this week. So stick around because we're going to be back just about this time next week with another episode of RIYL.